Welcome to Authors Unfiltered on Agents. I'm Amy Liu, and I'm today's rotating host with Darian G. and Katie G. Salisbury. We are so happy to have you here. Darian, Katie, and I cooked up this series when we realized that all three of us are well and widely published across pretty much all genres and platforms, with books that range from commercial bestsellers to more boutique indie titles. And between us, we've had many decades of publishing industry experience. And one reason we all came to Substack is to share that experience with you guys. So here we are today, unfiltered, to offer some of our hard-earned insights on the realm of literary agents. How to find representation, what to expect from an agent, how to make this crucial relationship work for you and your writing career. So welcome, everyone. First off, I thought maybe the three of us would give a quick overview of our publishing history. Not titles so much unless you want to, but books, journalism, the highlights. For me, I've published 4 novels, both at high-level commercial presses. A bunch of my books were published by Warner Books, which is now Grand Central, Hachette, and some were published by small presses. So that's the novel side. And then I've also published 6 nonfiction books, again, from high to middle press hierarchy, and probably more than a dozen books I've ghostwritten, all nonfiction. That's me. How about you, Katie?
My background's really started when I worked in book publishing in New York. I started as an editorial assistant, and that's kind of how I learned. I mean, it was like, in a way, it was like my real world MFA, which sounds a little strange to say that I learned how to write by editing other people,
Not at
but
all.
that really
Yeah.
is like, I mean, reading and seeing where things could be improved is definitely a part of becoming a better writer. So so I've been editing books really both in-house and now independently as a freelancer for the last 16 years. And then during that time, I started working on my own creative projects, both in photography and in writing, mostly nonfiction. So I've ghostwritten or collaborated on several books with other authors. And then last year, I published my own first book, which is a nonfiction, a biography of Anna May Wong. You can peek a little bit of the cover in the background. And I'm currently working on my second book, again, nonfiction, and it's going to be a bit of a cultural history of mixed race identity in America. So I've had a long experience working in the book publishing industry, but being an author myself is a somewhat new experience for me.
Right. Darian?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Darian G, and I am multi-published in a lot of different formats and a lot of different genres and different size publishing houses. So I have 5 novels with Penguin Random House. They're commercial fiction. I have a poetry chapbook with Poetry Society of America. And then I have a lot of anthologies and essay collections with indie presses. And I've also self-published, so I can always speak to that when people are like, why do you need an agent when you can just self-publish? Pros and cons to everything. So, if people are interested in that, we can definitely go there. But I have an interesting career in which I actually have 3 agents. Not currently, but not currently. And I know we're going to dive into that, but basically, once you sell a book with an agent, it's like having a child with somebody. You are bonded for life because of that property, which that was what they call it. And so, even if you go on and you find another agent, you still have a relationship with that former agent. So that has been my case. I've had 3. I was going to go out to get a new one, but I am waiting, and I have published without an agent, but I have thoughts on all of that. So we can dive into that whenever we're ready.
Great. Why don't we start by just telling the little story about how and when you got your very first agent? Again, since I'm already talking, I'll start. I was all of 23. It feels very quaint, the story of how I got my first agent. now because I think the world has changed so much, but this was back in 1978 or something like that. And I had a friend who had won the Mademoiselle. There was such a thing in those days, Mademoiselle short story contest, and in college. And he had gotten an agent, and I bumped into him in the street outside my apartment in New York, and he needed a pit stop, so he came up to my apartment and happened to see this big manuscript sitting on my coffee table and asked what it was and read the first few pages and said, "This is great. Would you like me to show this to my agent?" And he did, and the agent picked me up, and I had a book deal not long after that. It was not just because I was so brilliant, but it was because I was writing something that was really new and different, which was the very first memoir of anorexia. Um, at that time, anorexia was still fairly well unknown, and it was pervasive, but nobody had written a memoir about it. So that's kind of what got me published. And then we'll talk about what happened next because I made it pretty much a hash of the whole thing, but that was completely on me. Darian, how about you?
So I got my first agent. I actually had kind of went through a quote unquote first agent search two times. One was when I'd taken a year off to write the novel, which I do not recommend. I actually think it's better to be in the world when you're trying to work and get your first book out there. And I did it query style. I did it which is what most writers have to do. I didn't know anybody, so I had to just go and research and figure out who would be a good fit. I got an offer for representation, and then I freaked out and never signed the contract, put the book away, and went back to work. I just, self-sabotaged. And it was 10 years later, when I was in my mid-30s, when I had a book, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I had to go back out into the query submission thing all over again. And so that's what I did. So my first was query over the transom, same as what a lot of you have probably experienced or are thinking about doing. Just you do your homework and then you start to query. It was definitely a different time back then. We still were doing letters. I'm probably totally dating myself, but with the self-addressed stamped envelope. But we were also, but they were starting to do more email. And then my second agent, when I realized I need to make a switch, was from, do you want me to do that later? We have to talk that later.
Yeah, let's just do the first one for now.
Yeah.
Katie?
So I've only had one agent. As you know, I'm more fresh to the experience of being an author. I got my agent in 2019, but of course it was a couple of years in the making. I started publishing and writing pieces in around 2014. And so during that time, I did an essay on mixed race identity. I did a longer investigative piece about Chinese restaurant workers in New York. And so some of these pieces that were out there in the world got attention, and which often happens with a lot of writers, right? When you're publishing shorter pieces, agents will reach out and say, "Hey, do you have representation? Are you interested in writing a book?" And so a couple agents like that had reached out to me over the years, and I was, of course, happy to connect with them and say, I was like, "Yes, I actually am." We're supposed to be working on a book. I knew I wanted to write a book about Anna May Wong. So of course that took some time to get together. For nonfiction, nonfiction books are often sold on proposal, meaning you don't have to write the full manuscript as you would with a novel. And I had been very familiar with the process, having evaluated a lot of other people's proposals. So I knew that I needed to, now that I had published some clips, I needed to put together a book proposal, and to put together a proposal on, that's a historically research based, you got to do the research, right? So 2019 is when I started to do some initial research on Anna May Wong. I went and read her correspondence at Yale. And so I had some material that I could use to start putting the idea together. So I drafted a skeleton book proposal. It didn't have a sample chapter yet. And I basically went back to some of the agents who had reached out to me over the years. And then there were a couple of different agents that either I had worked with previously as an editor, or that I just knew I had known even just as an assistant, and I knew that they had a great reputation and they might do books that were in the same genre as mine. And so I just queried maybe like 5 or 6 agents. I think I ended up having 3 conversations and I got 2 offers of representation. And I ended up going with my agent, Aliyah Hannah Habib, who's at the Gernert Company, because she really understood the vision for my book. Because I was still in a state where what was in the proposal was kind of like the last thing I had researched, because I hadn't done that much research. And there was a portion of it was about Pearl Buck, who had written this movie that Anna May Wong famously didn't get a part in. And anyways, some other agents were like, "Oh, this is interesting. Maybe there should be more Pearl Buck in the book." And whereas Aaliyah was like, "No, this book is about Anna May Wong and just her." And it's like, and I think that's what's going to make it incredible. And so that really resonated with me. And yeah, so I signed with her.
I think that's so important that it really is about the project. And sometimes, we'll get into that, but sometimes you need different agents for different projects because they may not really just get the vision for it. If you guys care to share, I know that the people who are on the call would love names. Care to share who are some of the agents you've worked with or well enough to recommend? And I don't want to catch you out. You don't need to share, but I just think that people are always interested in knowing. So in my case, I have been with my agent for going on 40 years. Let's talk about dating yourself. We really grew up together. We were both in our 20s when we started. So his name is Richard Pine. And I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago, he joined forces with Kim Witherspoon and Michael Carlisle to form Inkwell Management, which is big powerhouse agency now. I have also worked, my editor on a couple of my books at Grand Central was Karen Carmatz-Rudy, who has since become an agent and joined De Fiore. And I've also worked with Lisa Gallagher at De Fiore. They are both fabulous agents. I have never worked personally with Betsy Amster, who runs a boutique agency, but I know her as a friend. I know her very well, and I have absolute respect for her. And then last week, I did a live interview with Bridget Crocker, whose new book, The River's Daughter, is fantastic. And she's a newbie. It's her first debut memoir. And she just couldn't say enough great things about Lauren McLeod at Avitas Creative Management in Nashville, which is unusual to have an agent in Nashville, but you can do it from anywhere now. So those are a few recommendations that I offer up to the universe. Do you guys have any?
I mean, I've been out of the loop as an editor, so I'm not on top of who's doing what in terms of agents. Now, but I feel like you named a lot of the top agencies that I would, say are very much admired. I'm with Aaliyah at Gernert Company. So I think they're great. Obviously, I've been with her for the last 6 years. She just sold my second book. Writer's House is a great place. Folio Lit. Yeah, I was already thinking of Inkwell before you mentioned it. I feel like there's quite a few, um, you know, well-known and powerful. Maybe like David Black Literary is another one. So there's what I always recommend too is for people to check out publishersmarketplace.com, which, you can buy like a 1 month subscription to. I think it used to be around $25. And they have a whole database of agents and editors and as well as deals, right? It's self-reported, so it doesn't have everything, but you can look at what kinds of deals agents and editors have been doing recently to find a match for the type of book you want to write.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna name names because I'm not with my age. if you are really good at research or not even very good at research, but you just know where to go, you can kind of find out who I've worked with in the past. I have a good relationship with all of them, but I left for different reasons, and I'm happy to go into them, but I'm not going to name anything here for that reason.
Yeah.
All I'll say is that I've been with a boutique and I've been with two really large, really, really large agencies. And, as Katie said, Publishers Marketplace is a really great resource in terms of seeing who's representing authors that are maybe comps that you would have for your books, and you can see kind of that helps narrow down the field quite a bit, because you don't want to just throw a huge net out there. You really want to be very clear about who would be a good fit based on the topic and the writing style and so on. I know that a lot of you probably know this, but I'll go ahead and throw it out. Anyways, for anyone who's new, if there's a book that you love, you go to the acknowledgement section, because authors almost always share who they think their agent in there. So that's another way to look at it. There's definitely pros and cons too, and we can get into agent strategy, going with someone who's new versus going with somebody who's more seasoned, right? Somebody who's new would have maybe a little more energy and a little bit more excitement, and they're trying to grow their list, so they're going to champion you. But they don't have connections. They can't get a meeting that easily. Perhaps they don't really have the inside scoop. Whereas somebody who's more experienced, they know people, they know who to reach out to, but they may have a really full list already, and they may not be able to give you the time. So there's all these things to think about. But really, it's going to come down to, what is your book about? I wish I could tell you that you get Amy got it, but you get the lifetime agent. Some people do. I didn't. And there's different reasons for that. We could talk about that later. But I think it's really important that you look at the book that you have right now, and don't start getting ahead of yourself and being like, 20 years down the road, I want to have, it's okay for your own visualization process. But in terms of finding somebody right now, you really want to look at your book and find a good fit for that book. And, there's lots of different checklists on how to do that. But yeah, so I'm sorry I'm not as helpful there. But really, you want to pay attention to kind of who's moving around, who's where, what's happening. Publishers Marketplace is great. But even on Substack, there are some really good resources, on where to submit.
Some great agents
always.
Yeah.
And they're always saying, so-and-so is open for submission, because an agent needs to be open for submission. You may find one that you love and they're not taking any new clients. So, lots of really good resources just right here on Substack. And so I really encourage you to check those out.
Yeah, I will just give a little plug for my agent. She also has a Substack called Delivery and Acceptance, which she just started like a few months ago. But I've really been enjoying reading it, because I learn a lot from. I mean, she has so much knowledge, right, from representing all these different clients, and so yeah, it's a really great resource for people to check out.
Right. This is kind of nuts and bolts, but other than the obvious of selling your book, what's the most valuable service your agents have performed for you as a writer? For me, it's the money. Obviously, getting Inkwell, one of their benefits is they do get a lot of money because they have a lot of respect from publishing insiders, editors, and publishers. But the other thing that I have found to be most valuable, frankly, is the gigs that I get as a ghostwriter. I will say that at one point, early on, because I was working on more literary work at different stages, I was toying with the idea of going to an agent who had more literary clients than mine does. And then I realized I make most of my money from ghostwriting, and I get most of my ghostwriting gigs from my agent. So I ended up staying where I am, and I think my literary work is on the back burner most of the time anyway. So, when it comes back, I will cross that bridge again. But
But I think that's great, because, I think the reality is, when you are in this literary space, a writing space, and you are trying to navigate your career, there's all sorts of pivots. And if you have an agent who you're able to have a conversation with, again, like you just shared, Amy, they may be able to do something else that's really important to your livelihood and your growth as a writer, even if it's not just selling your books. I think that the pros, I mean, if people ask me, should I get an agent? And if they have a memoir or novel, I'm like, yes, unless you're fine to self-publish and that's what you want to do. But the problem and challenge with self-publishing is reach. People can't find your book. And also there's not really a second set of eyes doing sort of a tight vetting of the work and saying, hey, did you think about this and doing that? You can hire an outside editor. And I know, Amy, you do some book editing as well as ghostwriting. Do you do that? Not so much.
Not
I used
very
to do that.
often.
Yeah, I don't do that very much either. But there are people who do that. You just have to remember that everybody has a different point of view, and even though they're an editor, they may not be right. So that's kind of the frustrating thing about it. But I would say that the editors I mean, the agents that I've had, excuse me, I mean, they were mostly for book deals. I mean, it was all for my fiction. There were different reasons that we parted ways. I'll just kind of summarize it briefly with my first agent. They were the first person who said yes, and that's really hard. It's kind of like saying yes on a blind date, or the first person that calls you to go to prom, and you're like, I better just say yes because I really want to go to prom. And if I don't say yes, I may not be going to the prom at all. And so, yes, this agent was on my list, but you don't really know from a list how well you're going to get along. And even though it's a business relationship, I'm very clear about that. I'm very professional. I'm not like, you're my therapist and best friend. But I'm also, I do have certain expectations. And so when we worked together, she did sell my first book. I will always be grateful for that. I mean, that just will always be good for that. But we had a communication challenge. We just seemed to never be able to communicate. It was so strange. We'd have a conversation and I'd be like, I don't know what we just talked about. And it was odd. It wasn't like we disagreed. It was a personality thing. So I decided to look for a new agent, which is what I did. And in that case, I didn't query so much as I felt like I knew a little bit more. And so I went ahead and reached out directly to a couple of agents and said, I'm published here. I actually have a book. Penguin is they get, first rights of refusal. I have a new book. And and that person was actually, her list was closed, but this was back in the day when you could do this, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And she called me right away, actually on my phone, and she's like, no, let's talk. And so I was with her and she was like a BFF. So I was so happy to have this BFF energy, except that she was busy and going through a lot of stuff and leaving the big agency to go out on her own. She's super huge right now, doing really, really well. And a few things just got dropped. My foreign sales got dropped. There are a lot of things that I found out after the fact. So we did 2 books together. And then when I realized all these things had happened and I just didn't feel like it was a good time for us to be working together because I didn't feel like a priority and my numbers were trending down. That's another fun thing for another conversation. I wrote a new book and decided to go out and find a new agent. And that was an agent that I was referred to directly by another writer. So I couldn't have done it with the first book, but I was able to do it with the third book. And that book sold at auction and did a lot of international sales. And that was just the facts, all business kind of relationship. So I went from, all over the place with this. It was what I wanted in terms of, I wanted that business acumen, but I didn't have that longer view scenario. They definitely looked at just what they call the property, which that tells you a lot right there, right? When we're talking about our literary work, it moves from this piece of literature that you love into something that is a commodity. And it is. I mean, if you're selling your book, that's really what it is. So when that happened, that was a hard thing. And she told me when we were in auction, some of you know this, that if the book didn't perform, she wouldn't be able to sell me again. And we had not even left the auction. And this was a huge auction back in 2010. And so and the book didn't perform. And so that kind of stuck with me. And so that's one reason why I've been agentless this time. I just honestly couldn't do a novel for a while. So lots of I've had a lot of people reach out. I think I could get representation pretty quickly because I do have a lot of good credits. And now that I am multi-genre, which is challenging because your platform's a little bit all over the place, but I've given that one up. You are who you are with what you write, and it's worked for me. I could probably go out and do it, but I'm going to really wait until I have the right book because I don't want them just to take me because I'm already published and I would be easy to keep in their stable. I want somebody who is going to help me figure out, hopefully, this last end. And hopefully, I know it sounds really romantic, but this will be like my last agent in a good way, right? Just so that's kind of what my journey has been like with all of that.
So I would echo most of what both of you have said. I mean, like when you Darren, when you said that, your book is like your baby that you have with your agent. I mean, your agent is essentially a type of marriage, right? You want to
Yep.
matchmake yourself with this person and hopefully have a long-term relationship. Um, and that's one of the things I always tell people too, is that like, as exciting as it is to get an offer from an agent, we all want to hear that, right? You have to have conversations with them and with other agents, right? Because they're not only interviewing you, but you're interviewing them, right? To see if it's the right fit. And so I think that's always the approach you kind of have to take going into it, even though you really do want, them to represent you. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing I really value, I mean, I definitely value the money. Like somehow my agent has always been able to get more money than was originally offered in scenarios that were not an auction. I had one offer and somehow she got them to raise it. I don't know how. So that is really impressive and helpful to me. Um, she has also gotten me a ghostwriting gig, which was also great because, yeah, that sustains you while you're working on, it's hard to be able to write a book just on a book advance. They're usually not enough to cover, if you need several years to write it, it's not going to cover your living expenses for that period of time. So that was extremely helpful. But I think the number one thing I really value about her is that she really, in the proposal process, she is very editorial minded and very rigorous, like almost like more rigorous than anyone has ever edited
Mhm.
me. And I've been through 2 rounds of writing a proposal with her now, and I really appreciate that because she forces you to distill your ideas and make them legible in a way that's going to sell it, right? Like, that's why she does
Yep.
that. She's like, "I know that this
Absolutely.
process is annoying, but, like, trust me, it's worth it,"
Yep.
and it has always been worth it. And not every agent does that, There are some agents who you send them a book proposal, and then they just go out with it. And maybe because they can just sell things without having to, like, make them perfect, maybe that's part of it, but I think a lot of, if you're a writer, you do want that feedback and you do want to make it better and you want to give yourself the best opportunity as possible when you go out with it. So I think finding agents who can really help you shine up your material or the proposal or whatever it is that you're hoping to sell, that's important too.
Yeah.
I just think
Oh, I
oh,
was just going to jump on the
mhm.
editorial thing because
Yep.
I think that gets to some of the questions that you need to ask an agent when you are interviewing them or even just doing your research. It's really important to look into their background and find out where they came from. Did they
Mhm.
have
Yep.
editorial jobs? Were they publicists? Were they in advertising? What are their strengths going to be given the skills that they've exercised earlier in their career? Now, I think many, many, many more agents are editors in their past lives or have editorial staples. Inkwell has,
Yep.
dedicated editors that work there. But my agent did not have any editorial. That was one of my problems with him earlier in my career. He had, his father had brought him into the business. My first agent was actually his dad, Artie Pine. And then Richard came on, and we were both the same age. So Artie was moving out, and he was trying to groom Richard for the business. So he kind of assigned me to Richard. But he was a baby agent then, and he was just, coming in fresh. He has incredible insight into marketing and commercial instincts and things like that, but he's never been an editor, and he's particularly, early on, he really didn't have any kind of sense of literary editing. So that was a problem. But now you can really do a lot of research on agents before you even speak to them, and you really need to know what you can and will work with. There are writers that I know who will not really take editing advice. So for them, rightly or wrongly, they probably want to go with an agent who has dollar signs all over them and is commercial, 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 and is not going to edit their work unless it's something specific about making lots of money. And that's fine, but most of us need more help than that. And so it really helps to go with somebody who has been an editor. Darian, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to also piggyback on that. I think it's really hard. And I know this might come across as a little discouraging. I'm sorry, but I do think that this is important to, at least, we want to always be sharing really honestly what our experience has been. And the truth is, you just really won't know unless you have a friend who is also represented by the agent. You won't know really what they're like, because everybody's trying to put their best foot forward when you're interviewing an agent. You do need to ask these questions, because how they respond, it's not actually what they say, but how they say it will give you an idea of if they're a fit for you. But the truth is, you won't know until you're actually working with them, what they're like. So my first agent we didn't do any editorial. The book just went out, and that was fine. And then I didn't have a chance to do another book with her, so I don't know. But I didn't have any editorial notes, maybe something small, right? And then the second one, she gave me a lot of plot type, like, I think we need something more here, something. I mean, it was very, very general, but she knew where the hot spots were. But that one also went out. Those two went out pretty quick. The third one that went to auction, my agent at the time had gone to Iowa, and she had an eye. She was extremely, extremely keen. And she did two things. One is she really worked on the editorial side with the book. She really asked harder questions and really made me do a lot more work. And the book was in really good shape. You can't really actually go to auction unless the book is already in pretty good shape. But that was the other thing. This is another reason why you would want to maybe consider an agent, is they have a strategy in terms of getting your book out there. And so, whenever I hear friends who have an agent, the agent's just throwing their book out there and, oh, they're not getting any takers, I'm like, it's tricky. You really have to have a strategy. And she spent a considerable amount of time, a few months. I was impatient because I'm so used to my books going out, honestly, within a month of me delivering them to the agent. And so I'd done that for 3 books, and I thought it would just be like that. And it wasn't the case. She really nurtured a lot of relationships. Hey, I'm working on this book by this author, Darian G. I'm really excited about it. It's a departure from her first 3 books. It was up-leveled. It wasn't a huge departure, but that's what she said. And this is what it's like. And we're not sharing it now. She does a whole sales takeaway thing. We're not sharing it now, but when we do, if you're still looking for something really good on your list, you should look at this book, that kind of thing. And so agents who know how to do that and know which editors are going to respond to that, that's why you have an agent. And the truth is, I do think that, especially with fiction and memoir, that you will leave money on the table if you try to represent yourself with a larger house versus if you have an agent doing that for you. I know they take 15%. I will just say that it's always been worth it. So if that's the route you're going and you're like, should I have an agent? Should I not? Unless you're already some kind of influencer with a huge following, I would say that 15% will pay itself back many times over,
One of the big warning flags, generally speaking, is if agents charge additional fees. Reading fees,
yeah.
for example, is a huge no-no. And I think 15% is standard across. I seem to have heard some rumors that some people charge 20, but I haven't encountered that myself.
All foreign is 20. So all of my foreign, I have to pay 20, but all domestic is 15%.
And any other fees that your agents charge?
My first agent, the one that we had to communicate, would charge me for photocopying, and I would literally get a bill for this was back in 2004-ish, for $1.50, but they would whatever, try to add it all up. So I'd see these and I'd be like, really, just here, just $20, and that's kind of silly. And then I will say that my, big agent they didn't charge me for anything. Nothing. But of course they made a lot of money from me, but they didn't know that at the time. The truth is, as much as we're like, agents should be doing this, that, and the other, nobody's getting any money until they can sell a book. And it's not always about you or your book and your writing. It's not always about them and how good they are as an agent. It's about, those two things obviously are huge factors, but they're not the only factors. And other factors such as marketplace, similar titles, which can go for you or against you. Too many similar titles, it feels quote unquote saturated, because there is a time lag with publication. So all of those things are things to sort of think about when it all, it is a lot. It is a lot. But at the end of the day, you just sort of start with where you are. And the question is, do I need an agent? And if you decide that, yes, I do, then you need to do a little of that heavy lifting to figure out, there goes Amy. Okay. We lost Amy. Okay. I'm sure she'll jump. Well, I don't know. I don't know how we get her back in, but
jump back.
Yeah. But I'll just finish my thought, and then Katie, you might have some thoughts on this.
Mhm.
But then, it's like getting a job. If you need to get a job, you're not going to stop after like, oh, I didn't get these first 10 jobs. You're going to keep going. And you need to do that with the agent work too. And then maybe you need to like, quote unquote, tweak your resume, tweak your query letter, your first 10 pages. It really, there are lots of groups where people give feedback. It does help. You can't hire all this stuff out because the truth is nobody knows your book better than you. So it's better that you just learn how to build the skill to write a really good query. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm going to see if I can get Amy back in the call, but she started it,
Um,
so I'm not sure we can do that.
well, you think she'll be able to rejoin us? Maybe. Okay, I guess we'll
She'll
find out.
see if she rejoins us. And sorry, I know this is the great thing about Substack Live is that we
It's
can just like
live.
talk about these things. It's live, and everybody else can like give us their 2 cents. But yeah, and there's some questions in the chat too, Katie. We can also just take a quick if you want to
Yeah,
look at them, then
sure.
you can see. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
Let's see.
how does being multi-genre make things more difficult and how does it make things easier? It might be more of a question for you, Darian, but I mean I can answer
Okay.
from my limited perspective because I've only, written in nonfiction at this point in my career. I mean, I might consider doing fiction at some point in the distant future. But I do think it was something that I did think about because my first book is a biography of an Asian
Hmm.
American woman, and the next book I'm doing is a little bit different. It's not a biography. It's not necessarily Asian American. It's a cultural history of mixed race identity. Of course, there are some things that are, there's overlap, right? It's about, I mean, a lot of what Anime Wong's story is about race. Um, so these are both stories in my head about race,
Uh-oh.
but I also
Mhm.
wondered, "Oh, hey, Amy, are you back?"
What happened? I'm so sorry. It just poof.
I don't know, but now my camera's having issues, so I'm gonna
Oh,
turn but anyways, yeah, that's
well,
strange.
Well, I
we're
hope you
just
carried on the conversation without me.
we did, we did. We went to another question in the chat, just talking about, like, multi-genre, is it harder or easier? But I think it is something you wanna think about as a writer once you get beyond the first book, right? If you're thinking about building a career in a certain way, I mean, I think you can also think separately about a ghostwriting career, right? And maybe, Amy, you have thoughts on that. And like for me, I think I've kind of veered into the book projects that I ghost or collaborate on are tend to have like a social justice element to them, which I really enjoy because that's a topic that I'm interested in and I get to learn from those authors and it also makes me feel good to work on those books. Kind of versus like the first ghostwriting project I did was a business book and wasn't really the best fit for me, I think personally. So I don't know. There's a lot of things to think about in terms of how you present yourself to the world. And, the ghostwriting track is a little bit less of a like consumer facing part of your career potentially. But maybe Darren, you can also speak to the different genres better than I can.
Yeah, so just, for those of you who may or may not know, the standard feeling about this is that in order to build a platform as a writer, which is a totally overused word and very difficult for novelists, definitely possible for nonfiction writers and memoirists, you don't really want to switch genres. And the idea behind that is because the minute you go over into a new space, your readers may not follow you, and so you lose. So one thing that the publisher is trying to do is they're trying to build you up and build up your readership. And so your readership, if they read a book, are going to be expecting a similar book in general. And that's the thinking. So that when you come out with a new book, someone's going to say, oh, I love Darian's last book. I'm definitely going to get this book. But if it's a completely different genre, then it's almost like starting over from scratch again. So they in the past were like, don't do that. Unfortunately for me, I did start off as a novelist, but I had that sort of unexpected kind of pivot thing. And then I ended up doing, I would say, creative nonfiction first, which I had already been teaching it, but I wasn't all in. And then it turned to poetry. And then I won an award, which helped a lot. I'm not going to lie. When you get recognition for your work, it helps. So if you're going to be multi-genre, if you can have books that either perform well, meaning sales, I'm sorry to say, it has to be a numbers game, or you've won an award, that helps a lot. And so now, and we're seeing this on Publishers Marketplace, I would be able to say Poetry Society of America, Chapbook Fellowship winner, Darian G, author of, and then a commercial book, and then have a new book. And the idea there is they're thinking that maybe the language will be better because there's more of a poetic element to it because she's a poet, but I'm not. really down that path. But that's how you can kind of work multi-genre, but it's very hard. And if you're brand new looking for an agent, I would not recommend that you say, these are all of the things that I can do. You focus on one book. You say, I'm a writer and I'm primarily, in a fiction writer, and this is the book. You wouldn't say that. You just say, here's my novel. Don't say anything else unless you've gotten awards for it or there's something that would really add to your credibility as to why they might want to take a closer look at you. Otherwise, just say what it is that you want them to say yes to you for. And it's so hard, I know, because you want them to understand all of you, but don't do that because they're already skimming as it is. They're probably going to miss it. Just focus on the most important element, which is this book.
Right. I wanted to talk a little bit about communication with agents, because that was at the source of my first two agent breakups when I was really young, and the misconception that I had was I think Darian, you said it earlier. I had this image of the agent's going to be my best friend, and we're going to, I don't know, hang out together.
And that didn't work. When I got that one didn't work either. So
that's true. Well, my first agent was a classic sort of stereotypical Hollywood agent, with phones growing out of his ears and, a 3-ring circus in his office all the time. I mean, he was a literary agent, but he really wanted to be a Hollywood agent, and he became a Hollywood agent later. And I walked into his office again. I just went with him automatically because my friend had hooked us up, and I thought this was great, and I didn't look anywhere else. I didn't think about anything else. But I did, in the back of my mind, have this idea that, well, we should be friendly, or he should make me comfortable, or something like that. And he made me feel so tiny and insignificant every time I was in his office because there were so many things happening in his world that I bailed on him right before the book was coming out, which is not a good idea. You don't want to bail on your agent right before the book comes out. And he was quite gracious and a little huffy, but understandably huffy. But then I still had this idea that my agent should be a pal. And so I went to another agent who happened to live around the corner from me. And I mean, I did get to meet James Baldwin because of him, but that was really the highlight. Other than that, he was somebody who, he got me, I think he did get me another book deal, but it was a book deal that I wasn't really capable of writing. And he ultimately was not a best friend either. And his career tanked, with coke going up his nose eventually. So it was, it was a lot about communication and my expectations of having a buddy in an agent. And I ended up with Richard, and we have just had a very, very, very productive professional relationship ever since. And I personally think that that's the best you can do. It's gravy if you're a friend with your agent. If and I am friends with other agents. So I know that, it can be wonderful to have that kind of friendly relationship, but it's not necessary at all, I don't think.
Katie, what's your relationship like?
Yeah, so I was familiar with Aaliyah's reputation as an agent, like, since I had started working in the business. So, and she was, she was kind of a friend of the editor I worked for, who was my mentor. And so, I think there's always I always had an admiration for her. So it's kind of a little bit of that type of relationship because I really respected the projects that she would send over. So yeah, and I think the expectation of being friends, like that's a good one to point out, is that's not really what an agent is.
Yep.
And we're very friendly and we know a lot of people in common, since I worked in the business, and that's kind of fun. But yeah, we're not best friends. And I also know that she's really busy and I'm like a small fish on her really big list of very important and established authors. So I think one of the things I'm always thinking about in our relationship is, and I also think about this with my editor as well, is you don't, I never, and this is also a thing I think other people think about, like, you wanna be, like, the good author, right? You wanna be the one that they like who doesn't complain too much and cause all these problems. But at the same time, you also do have to ask for what you need, right? Like, there are certain things that you have to put your foot down and say, like, "No, that's not okay, that's not gonna fly." And that's also really what an agent is for, and so I'm always just thinking about, like, what are the things that I really need to talk to her about and have her do something, and what are the things that are like, you know what, it's not a big deal, um, let it go, or, and for example, and this is not so much like my relationship with my agent, but like something that she and I were dealing with my current editor and publisher. We've been talking about the title for my next book, which we are hoping to announce, and we're kind of going back and forth on a lot of different things, which has been a little frustrating, because it's been several months now. At the same time, we got some information about the Chinese edition of my biography of Anime Wong, and the Chinese publisher came and said, "Here, we'd like to publish this in Chinese, because Not Your China Doll doesn't really translate in China,"
Mm.
right? Which I totally understand. And at first, I was very resistant to the title they wanted, which was a phrase, actually a title of one of the chapters, which is "The Woman Who Died a Thousand Deaths," because that's something that Anime Wong said about
Mhm.
herself, that her epithet should read when she died, "I died a thousand
Mhm.
deaths," because she had to die so often in her films. And, even though I titled a chapter that, I personally was concerned that that was going to be a very negative spin on her story. And so I had some back and forth, and basically asked, like, can the publisher tell me a little bit more about their rationale behind this? And, like, what does it actually mean in, like, the context of Chinese culture? And so my agent did say to me, like, privately, "I think this is something we should probably, like, just approve if we wanna win
Yep.
the other fight about
Yep.
your book title." And I really appreciated that. So it's like being able to have that, really direct and frank conversations is something I appreciate. So I think that's one of the value thing, like, something you look for in a agent relationship. And I think the other thing too that's been super valuable is that, I'm mixed race, and now I'm writing a book about mixed race, and my agent is also mixed race. So
Mm.
she, like, 100% gets what I'm writing about. And so this is also an example of when, like, she's the exact right fit for the project that I'm doing. And I don't think that would be the case with a lot of other agents.
Yeah, as
Yeah.
somebody who's thinking about going out, that is actually a bigger concern for me now, or a priority for me now than it was before. I knew I wanted primarily I did want somebody who was a woman. That was just important to me. I wasn't as concerned whether or not they were somebody who is a person of color or Asian American, which is what I am. But it's actually kind of important to me now. I mean, it might be also because of what I'm writing. I'm not going, but I mean, there's a very large playing field of agents out there, and agents who represent a lot of different genres and a lot of different authors. And, I am definitely honing in where I want my attention to be, because I do want somebody who sort of reflects, um, sort of my sensibilities about how I look at certain things and how I would be trying to make some certain changes in a book, because you're right. The agent really will help you, get the book. I mean, the book has to be in pretty good shape when they get it, but they will do that final help polish tightening that they know needs to happen before it goes out to the publisher. I think that that's a really important thing to look at now. And so I'm just sharing, with all of us here, that for me has become something that I look at a lot more closer than I did before. Um, and so I do think that you should really find someone who just feels like they are, not just because they're also another woman or Asian American, Asian, but somebody who just feels more in alignment because you just share some sensibilities that will help make a lot of these decisions, and you can have these honest conversations with.
Yeah, this is another area where if you're dealing with an agent who has been an editor, you can go back and look at the books that they've edited. And if they've edited books in your wheelhouse, then you're going to know that they're even a better fit for you. So it's not just that they've sold the books, but editing is a pretty intensive process. So if they've edited books that you like and respect and can relate to, then you probably are pretty simpatico, I would think. We are almost up to an hour now. This has been really, really great. There any parting comments that you guys want to give people? to emerging writers, especially about finding the right agent? One point?
I mean, I would just go back to this whole idea of of it being a matchmaking process, which means, just like finding true love, it's not something that necessarily happens overnight. You have to kiss a lot of frogs. Like it's a process. And I know that there's always this feeling of urgency, right? That you want to get moving, you want to have the agents, so you can sell the books, so you can publish it and be out in the world talking about it. But it really is something that's worth taking the amount of time to vet them properly and give yourself, like pursue all of the options available to you before you make a decision. So that's my parting advice.
Darian?
My parting advice is do your research. And I mean, like, really do your research. Be willing to ask yourself really honestly what's important to you, and make sure that that is part of what comes into this whole decision making process. Also be willing to change your query if you need to. So as you're, hopefully you're learning every time you're out there, but keep doing your research. What makes a good query letter? What makes a good query package? Who are the agents that are in my wheelhouse? What are some other ways that I can get an agent other than by querying? It is a lot, but it's doable. People get agents all the time. They are picked out of the slush all the time. I was picked out of the slush, launched my career. It's doable, but it does require a certain amount of tenacity and research on your part. Don't be afraid of it. It's like taxes. Just do it, and it will get done. And don't give up if this is what
Yeah.
you want. If this is what you want. Mhm.
I actually have two. One is that never start looking for an agent until your work is really, really
Yeah.
ready, because that's the biggest mistake you can make,
Yep.
is taking your work out before it's ready to go. And as they say, you never get a second chance to make a
That's true.
first impression. And so if you show work that's undercooked the first time, that's going to stick with the agent, and you don't get a second chance to go back to them later, unless by some miracle they've seen the work and given you notes and invited you back in the door. Most don't do that. The other piece of advice that I would say is, if you're an emerging writer, especially if you're a young emerging writer, it's really not a bad idea to look for young emerging agents that you can grow
Mm.
with. I think it's problematic. You're kind of in a difficult position if you're a young emerging writer and you get with the top agent in an agency who's also on the cusp of retirement, because then you're going to have a short-lived relationship and you're going to have to start this process all over again. So especially if you're somebody that you think you've got a lot of books in you and you want this to be a robust career, I would say, look for people who are sort of learning the ropes with you. And that can be a great long-term relationship, as I've discovered. So, okay, thank you all. I think we've got a lot of people on the call, and I am so grateful to you all. I'm so grateful to you, Darian and Katie, and we are going to do Authors Unfiltered another time. We're cooking up new topics, and one of us will be hosting next time and hopefully not get bounced off the air in the middle of it. But
Thanks,
thank you
everyone.
all.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And good
All
luck.
right. Take care. Bye.